Welcome to this episode of Black Girl in the CLE, the podcast, and our new series, Let's Vote Cleveland. Well, Let's Vote CLE for short. In this series, we'll talk to people from local organizations and local residents about the issues and what's motivating them to vote in this upcoming election. We'll get started with this week's guest right after this. This episode is being produced without interruptions with support from a grant from the American Press Institute. Welcome to the episode. I'm your host, Shana Black, and today I am joined with Jennifer Lumpkin, the Civic Engagement Strategy Manager of Cleveland Votes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So just to get people started, if they were not familiar with your organization, can you tell me a little bit about Cleveland Votes? I follow you guys on Instagram, but I'm not sure a lot of people, maybe they don't know about you.
Sure. So first, my name is Jennifer Lumpkin. I'm the Civic Engagement Strategy Manager for Cleveland Votes. Cleveland Votes was founded back in 2013 by Erica Anthony and Crystal Bryant, both who were working full-time jobs. Erica was working as the Vice President of Government Relations and Strategy for CNP, and Crystal was working for the Office of Reentry as the Director. But they both saw a really huge gap as far as voter engagement in our local jails and prison systems. So they actually started Cleveland Votes as an initiative to register the voters who were least likely to have access to registration and least likely to know about the process as it related to their incarceration. So I came on board in 2018, and since then, the organization has really matured into what we call a democracy building entity. So the primary focuses are education around civics, empowering folks and enabling them to facilitate voter registration work throughout the city and all other work that has to do with civics, as well as connecting folks to resources and the means to do that type of work. So within those three sort of categories, we fund organizations, so we are a funder. We fund volunteer groups and nonprofits to do voter registration and other civic-oriented work. We also educate using our nonpartisan annual training. We basically train organizations and individuals about what nonpartisanship means, because people get really confused about the difference between nonpartisanship and bipartisanship. And then we act as a convener every year with our local Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. We host National Voter Registration Day, which is a huge holiday that goes for a full week, starts the second to last Tuesday in September of every year. And we are an active convener and the facilitator of National Voter Registration Day for our region. We came in third place nationally last year. So we put Cleveland on the map, whereas other states were competing statewide. We had the most registrations out of all the states, and we were in top three, besides Texas, who beat us out. So those are kind of the three things that we really focus on as our mainstays. But outside of that, we do a whole lot of programmatic, creative strategy around civic engagement and democracy work.
So what do you think here in Cleveland, since you guys are doing the work, what do you think that Cleveland needs more of? And I know that's a broad stroke, so even if you want to think about it in neighborhood-wise, is it more education? Is it more connectivity to resources? What do you think the needs here are in the city?
Well, I think one of the things I'm learning through working with our democracy fellows in Larchmere area, wards 4 and 6, is that people want to have a more culturally relevant way of communicating what these candidate positions and roles of government look like, and translate that to people's lives as it relates directly, so that folks understand like who they're voting for and why they're voting for them. Because we're nonpartisan, we have to focus on issues, and we can't focus on candidates. So the key gap that I'm seeing is that there aren't a lot of avenues readily available for people to, number one, understand how these civics issues relate to their lives, but then saying, okay, this is how you activate in a way that relates to your life, the people that you know, the people that you like to enjoy, day to day, weekend to weekend, activities with. This is how you integrate that into your neighborhood barbecue. this is how you talk about this, go to your local comedy show and you want to integrate democracy building. We are kind of the democracy curators, but we need more people like us doing that kind of work and also educating folks on, just basics around civics and what it means to like register voters in the process.
What do you think people need to know, to have these conversations? Because I get that you're empowering people, and I know people that are like, I'm just going to go tell people randomly on the street they need to vote. And that might not be the right tactic. What do you think people need to know that want to have these conversations because they've heard people say misinformation or I'm not going to vote? Because what is that advice to them?
Well, yesterday I had a conversation with a gentleman on the corner of Chester and 55th. And he said, what's going to change? What difference does it make? Why should I even vote? But I'm going to vote, but tell me why should I care? And what else should I do? And I'm like, well, to be completely honest with you, voting isn't the only thing that you should be doing. However, it's one step along the pathway. And if you don't vote, we'll never know what the possibilities could be. So, and if you're not engaged, we can't even begin to talk about what we do want to see or what can happen when you're more involved in a process that builds democracy. So the first thing I do is I encourage people to understand that the work we do at Cleveland Vote was literally people were lynched doing this. Fannie Lou's hammer was beat and shot several times by police for trying to register voters in Mississippi. So the fact that we're able to do this shows how much change has happened, albeit very incremental change, but we have made changes. And the fact that we're here, we have to acknowledge that 25, 50 years from now, there will be more change, but we have to keep going. So that's really the encouragement that I give people and just a perspective on time and what has happened since the 50s and 60s.
That's cool. I mean, I think I've heard people say I'm not going to vote, or the idea that if I vote one time, I expect a drastic difference. And we know that there's more to it than that. Exactly. What do you think, how do you get people involved? So you have the conversations and everybody's comfort level is not the same. And I know it seems like, and I'll say it that way, there are people that are the encouragers to vote. And then there are people that are, like the people that we are encouraging, but everybody can't encourage the same way. So everyone's not going to start striking up that conversation. How can people help this cause of getting people? Right now, we still have time to register. So how can we get people to register or even start moving toward that process?
Well, I think after the presidential debate last night and watching that, I think it should be pretty easy to encourage people because we know that the discourse in our democracy in our country is at a place where there's not much room for hope other than voting, right? Like that's the kind of the foundation of what's going to rock the boat, of what's going to bring people to a place of understanding why it's so important. So I'm using the example of the presidential debate last night, the protest. I was part of the organizing group for the protest that took place down in Wade Lagoon, and seeing all of the various groups of folks who would not necessarily typically represent what I would say is our conservative democracy here in Ohio. Seeing that is what I'm telling people about that experience and that situation and all of the diversity that we kind of like organize amongst ourselves, seeing that galvanizing coming together. That to me is what I'm sharing with people about why they need to vote in these last few days. But the misinformation that we've been hearing, right? All of the misinformation is something that not only confuses people, but disenchants them. So we're essentially giving people this like prepackaged infographic language and messaging that says registration ends on October 5th. Register now. Like that's it. Register now and vote early starting October 6th. We're just making sure people have very clear and distilled information. And I think that not only makes it easier for people to understand, but it also gets across the urgency. Like, time to register now, early vote October 6th. Once you're ready to early vote, actually read and study your ballot. The Board of Elections has your ballot available on their website right now. Vote411.org has your ballot where you can practice and study right now. So if you're just not registering to vote, make sure you start studying today. But the cutoff for registering is October 5th. So that's like the primary message at this moment in time.
What do you think the confusion is within all the mail-in vote? So, there's a lot of language saying you need a plan to vote, or, like you said, study your ballot. And as a teacher, I know that one thing that we would always tell the kids, or we found out, is telling people to study. They don't know what that means. Like, look at it, go over it. What's the action step, or what should they be looking for?
Sure. So when you actually go to review your sample ballot, you'll see the candidates that are running for office, but you'll also see a number of issues. There's a CMSD school levy, tax levy that's on the ballot. The number one issue in Cleveland is that people do not understand the language. Like, what is a levy? What does this actually mean for my school district? How will this either make it better or make it worse? There's a gentleman by the name of Giovanni who created Electors of Cleveland. That website is actually the website that gives you pretty much insider intel if you're fortunate enough to have Wi-Fi. But he actually created that website within the last, I want to say, 3.5 to 4 weeks, because there hasn't been a comprehensive place to view all of the information you might need. And to be honest with you, like, this is the kind of thing we have to learn in school and ongoing. Like, it has to be integrated into our lives. It has to be culturally sound, and it has to be something that's not just a point of contact during social services or, with nonprofits. It has to be integrated at every point of our lives, but it's not. So when we say review your ballot, we're not only just talking about knowing the candidates and knowing the issues on the ballot, but actually having time to go to a site like Electors of Cleveland and research and get some context and point of reference as to what it means. But as it stands, there are folks that are trying to create a place or a hub where that civics lesson and those lessons that you would get in preparation for the ballot would be a mainstay, but they don't currently exist as we need them or know them outside of Electors of Cleveland that I personally know of. And we have our own curriculum that we're working on, but again, it's not something that actually is readily available outside of someone using their Google search tab and actually trying to copy, paste, translate what they see on their ballot to the World Wide Web.
So let me ask you a personal question. Do you remember your first election, or how long have you voted?
So I actually didn't start voting until President Obama ran for office the first time.
Okay.
And then I didn't vote again until 2018 when I moved back home and started working for Cleveland Vote.
So like, what was the why and why you began voting, or what was the why you didn't vote when you turned 18?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I voted in that election was because President Obama was a mixed race man who had a wife who I could relate to from South Side of Chicago.
Right.
And I'm like, I want to see that family
right.
in the White House. And I think, if anything, this gives me a trajectory. So when I have children, I can say, you can be that.
Right.
And I wanted that. I wanted to be able to say, you can do that. You can be that in this country. Afterwards, I stopped voting because I lost faith in the system. Once I saw that everything he was trying to get accomplished was filibustered or held back in the Senate, I said, okay, so the system isn't really meant to actually realize change. It's just kind of meant to create a facade of change, right? And then when I started working for Cleveland Vote again, I had just come out of farming and doing urban agriculture, and that was my main sort of avenue for building democracy and what I thought was real for me. And when I knew that, a lot of the work behind the policy work behind agriculture was based on voting, and I was working in policy and food council work, I'm like, well, I need voters. I have to have voters
right.
to back up all the work we're doing out in the soil. It doesn't mean anything if we're just out here toiling and working. We have to have people who are ready to go to the ballot box and represent. So that's what revived my energy in mobilizing and doing this work again. And now that we're in the place that we're at, I'm like, well, there has to be a re-education and a reimagination, a re-envisioning of how we make this civics work important to Americans. It's just only important to a small few of us. And I want that to change. I want more equity in that space.
So I'll tell you why I asked that question, because one of the things I've noticed, I've always been a voter. So I was, fortunate to be in a school that was very, I always say it was the 60s freedom riders that raised us and taught us. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was that thought of, like, to vote, this, like you were waiting to 18. And it was also one of those elections for me that while it wasn't Obama, it felt Obama-ish. Like you got on board with it. Rock the Vote was a new movement. MTV was talking about it. So yeah, you're going to vote. And, but as I think about people that, as I encounter people that often aren't voters, well, maybe to me that's unfathomable. Like, what do you mean you might not vote? Like, I vote primary elections and special elections. Like, I vote. And so realizing that I can't have that same conversation with people, like, but it's amazing, you should vote, it's about like, people don't get that because
Right.
they weren't taught that. And so, I'm really interested, and hopefully for me, even on this project and in this series of episodes, is how do we reach the people? Because, maybe you didn't get it at school, or maybe even when I was a teacher, we had kids, and I had staff that I worked with that would say, misinformation about voting. Voting is not for
Mm-hmm.
black folks, or if so and so's president, we're all going to be slaves. And if you're the teacher, what did that do to the kids? And so now we're at this point, like, how do we reach the people that, how do we go forward? Because like you said, there's a re-education piece. And even after November 3rd, we can't just say, oh, well, no voting for 4 years. We'll worry about it in 4 years. Sorry to ramble on that question, but
Yeah,
like, how do
no,
we do that?
we've been, so this is a conversation I've been having with my comrades for the past 2 years now, is that in order to reach the people that you're trying to convince, you have to those people have to be the ones crafting the message. Those folks have to be the ones creating the modes of activation because they're most proximate to and empathize with why people are not voting. I was one of those people. So, for instance, in 2018, when I hired a small art and entrepreneurial contractor to bring Nipsey Hussle to Cleveland, it was to speak specifically to those people who admired Nipsey, believed in what he was talking about, and also would believe and listen to him when he talked about issues that were on the ballot, like Pilot Issue 1 in Ohio, because he was formerly incarcerated, because he became an entrepreneur, because he became an artist. And that spoke to a lot of people in Cleveland who resonate with that same trajectory, right? But there aren't a lot of people locally like a Nipsey who folks in Cleveland would be like, oh yeah, let's vote because so and so from down the way said to vote, right? So without having a partner like an indie media, or without having democracy fellows who are from the Larchmere Buckeye area to say, okay, let's go to the corner stores, let's talk to the barbers, let's actually have an art gallery hub because that's what people in our neighborhood resonate with. It's difficult to reach them if you're not them.
Right.
So I've been a big proponent of like hiring people from our communities who we believe are the people who are disenchanted, and we have to bring them into this space as the architects of that message. If we keep trying to reach people from inside an echo chamber, we're never going to get the message that we're trying to convey across. So we are essentially the folks who are chauffeuring in the people who are disillusioned, disenchanted, and saying, "Okay, tell us why." And here is some fodder for you to take and cultivate and craft the means by which we're going to get this thing going again, get it culturally relevant, make it a coming of age moment, make it like you said when you turn 18, voting was similar to how people get a driver's license and they're excited, or now you're 21 so you can drink. It became that moment, right? So we're trying to create that same moment for people even after they're 18. And how hard is that? That is very difficult to tell a 32-year-old person, hey, voting is something that you should be proud of, that you should want to do, that you should take your children to, or your little niece or nephew to when you're doing it. Like, we've been really trying to promote and advocate for that sort of cultural cognizance so that people understand why people fought so hard for it.
Right.
And that's what's been lost.
Yeah. And I think like when you were talking about like taking your children, it made me flash back to to my earlier voting memories. Like my mom would take me. She was a single mom, and so I remember going to vote. Like, what am I doing? I couldn't see above the booth because the booth is so high up. But
Right.
like I was just there. Like, why are we in this place? What are we doing? And she explained it to me. And so it was in that moment, I think probably where seeds were planted, because I knew that every once in a while we go to this random place and I don't know what we're
And she
doing. And maybe somebody gives me a sticker, like, that says I voted, and I didn't, but that was kind of cool too. But as I think about that, and you're bringing the people in, I heard you say, what are you seeing the change from the groups? Like, what's the feedback as people leave these interactions? Are they like, hey, it makes sense, or?
People are pretty much like activated, excited, tuned in. I mean, that's what happened with Jada from Indie Media. When we first met, she was just kind of like, what does this mean? What does Attorney General do? Why is it so difficult to vote, and why are the dates so, all over the place in the times? And I had to explain a lot of very nuanced characteristics about the system, and that has been so catalytic when having those real one-on-one conversations with people who just come into this work thinking that we're just going to do an event, but they end up learning that there's so many parts and pieces that have to be considered, right? And that, to me, has been something that has been contiguous with everyone that we've worked with, everyone that has come into doing any sort of voter registration, like Cleveland Biscuit Head. Shana is a Black female entrepreneur who has a food business, and she just really cares about registering voters. So in all her pop-ups, she's actually integrated voter registration.
Nice.
And having pop-up parties.
Nice.
People come out for her biscuits, but they actually come out because of the spirit of the event too, right? So there's so many different folks who would traditionally not be incorporating voting and democracy into the thing. There's their niche, but it's starting to happen and it picks up. And I think that's why the Cavs and the Browns are like, we want to do something now, because they're seeing that that's what's resonating. And without having that real, I would say, authentic care around the improvement of people's lives long term, a lot of people don't want to deal with it. So it's having an effect on the for-profit sector that's really feeding into making that cultural connection to democracy building that would not exist outside the nonprofit typical message that we would see around this time of year.
So do you think, as we're getting ready to close our voting registration period here in Ohio and start early voting, what's the advice? Because I think, and I'm no expert and I have no data, but so I'll just put it personally, I think that many people still will just decide they're going to wait for November 3rd because that's what I've always done. And I think that, like, I moved away from that, and I'm so glad that I've moved away from that. If you could speak to that, like, what's the thought process people should be going through on what makes sense for them to vote?
Absolutely. So we have a few very clear talking points that we've decided are going to be the message to people. So October 5th through November 2nd, we're encouraging people to not only vote early, but if you want to be as safe as you possibly can, drop off your vote by mail ballot in the drop box, and don't necessarily depend on USPS to mail your actual ballot into the Board of Elections. Right. Their drop box is 24/7. You can go at any point in time, and you don't have to get out of your car. You just open the window and drop it. You can even walk through if you take the bus. Second, if you're going to vote early, make sure you check out the office hours at the Board of Elections, because they have very specific hours for early voting in person. If you're only going to vote on the day of the election, which is November 3rd, you can check out all of the polling locations as well. But we're encouraging people to go to the Board of Elections early by November 2nd to vote early and safely, to avoid lines. You can go on a Sunday. You can go on a Saturday morning and vote early. Take your mask. Take your hand sanitizer. They have it at the Board of Elections already. And if you've already applied to get your vote by mail ballot, you can go to the Board of Elections early and cancel it and say, I want to vote early instead. Or you can just fill out your ballot and hand it to them right then and there. But early, early, early. That's the key message. Go vote early. And if you have a ballot, you can drop it off in person instead of mailing it if you're worried about delays for mail, which takes about 20 days round trip between it coming to you and you sending it back.
Right. Thank you. And see, I didn't know the piece about the canceling the mail in. Like, I've always been an early voter, and with the COVID situation, everything said
Mm-hmm.
mail. And if you remember how our primary went, I was thinking, like, we have to mail just because who knows what this is going to look like. And our office is really across the street, so that's why it's always convenient to just
Okay.
go on a random Tuesday at like 11 because there's no one there. You know, you walk in there, it's a big space, it's spaced out. So I voted early for the primary before we even knew COVID was a thing. But, you know, like
Yeah.
before we were shutting down. And they were very much about social distancing because the things were spaced out. You know, like I had put my hand down there, like, don't touch the counter. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And they're like, that's really for your safety. And then all of a sudden, you know, primary hit and all the stuff that happened with here in Ohio in the primary. And all I kept thinking was, I'm so glad I was already done. And so I didn't have to worry about the June or the this or the that. Like, I had already voted.
I tell my friends and family, go within the first 2 weeks of when the registration closes. So within the first 2 weeks of October 6th, that's what I'm telling my family and friends. Don't wait until October 31st.
Right.
Like, go.
Right. And honestly, for someone who watches it from the window, it gets overwhelming the further it goes on. There's more people outside trying to hand you literature. You know, you're going downtown, and here in Cleveland, you know, going towards downtown can be a thing. And, you know, the parking questions, and it just gets more congested. And so, you know, absolutely, you know, when you have that day off from work, I think it's really about going to vote that morning, just as you would run any other errand. Just go down there and do that. Final words as we get ready to wrap up, because I appreciate your time. Final words, or what is it that Clevelanders who maybe still haven't registered need to know, or the why? Because I'll tell you my piece, and then I'll let you say your piece, because I'm sure you're going to say it more eloquently. Mine is you register just because you still have the option. Like, register by the 5th, and then we can talk about why you should vote the rest of the month, but you've got to register. What's your piece?
Mine is also create as many options for yourself as possible now so that you know what options you have later. So vote October 6th if you need to, as soon as possible on October 6th, but register today. And please plug in. So it's not just about registering, but it's also about giving folks rides if they need them, and if you feel confident and safe enough to do that. And then also inform people and use your social media platforms in a way that's going to distill information and provide clear messaging to people, because we are our most safe and trusted source of messaging and information right now, and really need to rely on each other to get the message out. So share ohvotes.org with everyone. Check out Cleve Votes, all of our social media on Instagram. We are here to give you all the information you need and to share. But please, please, please register now, vote ASAP, and share information, share information, share information.
All right. Today's guest is Jennifer Lumpkin, the Civic Engagement Strategy Manager of Cleveland Votes. I thank you so much for your time today. You're always welcome to come back. And definitely, guys, go vote. Let's vote Cleveland. And we'll talk to you next time here.
Thank you.